What's your read on this number? As Ross said there, I think it's a nice note for you to pick up on. He said it would be good news for the Albanese government if they were able to get at least one rate cut over coming weeks.
Well, it's over to you, Michelle Bullock, isn't it? The pressure is now on Michelle Bullock to cut rates. It's as simple as that. And if she gets up at that press conference, which Jim Chalmers tried to introduce some accountability in the system and take it off the politicians, if she gets up on February 18 and says, oh, sorry, you know, we're not quite there yet, unemployment's not high enough, and I know it's almost within the band underlying inflation, but it's 3.2, not 2.9, what do you think most Australians are going to think? And what do you think most headlines are going to be? And she would have seen what happened to Philip Lowe, Michelle Bullock. So suddenly it doesn't become an Albanese and Chalmers problem in that instance, Kieran. It becomes a Michelle Bullock problem. And that's exactly where the government want it, and that's where they want it at this time of the electoral cycle. They are under immense pressure, understandably, given the price rises, the rent rises that Australians have seen over the past couple of years. The government can say we've finally got inflation under control, rates are going to come down. It's whether Australians can forgive them for the rises that have occurred in the meantime. And we all know there's a global inflation problem fed in as well, but matter of fact, the fact of the matter, should I say, is that Australians are grumpy, as they should be, that prices have gone up by so much, and the opposition can continue to say the federal government could have spent less and led to this being less of a problem. But from the government's point of view, they are finally in a position. As one of the ministers said to me a year and a half ago, Kieran, we are hoping that by the time of the election, inflation is under control and rates are starting to come down. We are looking at a situation where if it doesn't happen in February, and government sources have told me they reckon it's a 50-50 possibility, and they expected 3.2% underlying inflation today, by the way, it must happen, surely, in April. April 1, and are we looking at an April 12 election out of this? I think possibly we are. Now, Michelle Bullock has proven herself to be very conservative. She would have seen what happened to Philip Lowe when he annoyed people with mortgages. So the pressure is all on her. And we've got 2 weeks of Parliament before we get to this important RBA decision. But gee, this hangs like a cloud over that entire parliamentary session and over every single interview that an economic minister or the Prime Minister does and every single press conference until then. It's going to be a long wait, but I can't wait to see what the Reserve Bank's going to do, Kieran.
Yeah, and Ross, as Andrew points out there, and I want to get your view on this from an economic perspective, because the RBA wants to defend its independence. It needs to say it's not going to be pressured from jawboning from politicians. This number comes in, it's the lowest in terms of underlying inflation, the lowest in almost 4 years. It comes in lower than what the RBA had forecast. It gives it wiggle room to say this is lower than what the markets thought. It shows, I guess, if they did move, if they were to cut rates, that it's not necessarily because of the pressure. This is because of the numbers, Ross.
Yeah. I think that's the case. It would be ultimately the pure economics. The one thing and the reason for the conservatism is because they don't want to cut rates only to see an outbreak of spending and inflation and therefore have to come back later and have to raise rates. That would be the worst thing for the Reserve Bank to have to do for its reputation and indeed for our economy as a whole. But the second thing is also, I just wonder how much pressure does actually come off the government, even if interest rates are cut. And the reason for that is because even though, yes, inflation is moderating and the Treasurer in about, sort of at 12:30 in about an hour's time is going to come out and say exactly this. Hey, inflation's moderating, we're bringing it under control. But the fact is that the person at home or the business person who is out there coping with higher prices is not seeing prices necessarily fall. So they're still having to bear the costs of the inflation that we've seen over the past few years. So yes, inflation might be moderating, but prices aren't in the main falling. And that's important. So the cost of living pressure is not going away. So therefore, the grumpiness of the population is not necessarily going to disappear that quickly just because you got this one set of numbers or just because you get one interest rate cut. It's going to need a bit more than that. And that's why I suggest, again, Katie Gallagher saying today there might be more measures from the government. I'd suggest that is pretty much almost a likely bet between now and the election.